Hello BookTube, it's Roz here with a tag, and this is the Good Books with Bad Endings tag, which was created by Shawn, the book maniac, but as he says, it's from an original idea, a recent video by Eric Karl Anderson, a really interesting video about bad endings in books, and Shawn's kind of taken that and turned it into a bit of a tag. Which is brilliant, actually. And what he asks us to do, it's not, he hasn't done prompts, he's just asking us to think about books with bad endings, but not just kind of cheap bad ending, like, oh, not rubbish books with just predictable endings, books that were otherwise good books or could have been good books if the ending hadn't kind of in some way spoilt it for you, or maybe it still was a good book, but you were just disappointed by the ending, which is a kind of more interesting topic, I think. And so I've given it a go, and I've thought of some. And initially I thought, oh, I can't think of any. And then once I got going, I got quite carried away. So I've cut it down to, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books. Okay. And my first kind of category, I suppose, is books that are high concept books, and the concept is really, really interesting, but then maybe the author doesn't manage to pull it off. And the classic example of that for me is The Power by Naomi Alderman, and that was a huge book, and everybody thought it was brilliant. Well, no, not everybody thought it was brilliant. There was a whole load of us that thought it was rubbish, but it appealed to people because the concept is so good. The concept is that women develop the power to kind of like zap, like a kind of internal electrical power, so they can almost like taser people at will, and that this changes the balance of power between the sexes, which of course is a great idea for a book. It's just a shame she couldn't pull it off. And I mean, it's perhaps wrong to say bad ending, because I'd say, about the first half of the book, I was thinking, I started the book thinking, oh, great. First half, I was thinking, oh, yeah, this is kind of working. And then, but by 3/4 of the way through, I probably should have bailed. Perhaps I would now. I hate it. I hate bailing. It's not something I do really. I ploughed onto the bitter end, and by the end of that book, I hated it and was so. But it was kind of like a good. It was kind of like a good anger, enjoyment, almost cathartic anger. That she'd sort of cheated me by failing to think through how she was going to make this book as a whole work, having started with that brilliant idea. Another example, but a much better book, and one that was still like a 4-star read for me, is Death at Intervals by Jose Saramago, the Portuguese writer. And the high concept idea for this book is what happens if people stop dying, which is brilliant, isn't it? And he really, for me, the book kind of falls into two halves, and death is Lady Death in this book, and in effect, like, death decides to take a holiday, take a break, and so people stop dying. And there's the first half of the book is all about what happens, if people stop dying. At first everyone's delighted, and then of course society starts to implode, and he goes into the practicalities of what happens if you're a funeral director, or but then also what happens in care homes if, like, you've got more and more people and no one's so brilliant. The second half of the book just didn't work as well for me. It kind of went off on a more of it became more whimsical, I suppose. And some people, the second half of the book is their favourite half. But for me, it was a brilliant book with a less successful second half. So it's not exactly a bad ending, but it's a sort of a, yes, by the end I was, oh, I wish it had stayed as good as it was in the first half. So in that sense, a bad ending. Then you get the books that have like a really strong start and then seem to lose their way. And I've got two examples of this, both relatively recent ones. One is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, and there was lots that I really liked about that book. I liked the nature writing and the how it conjured up Northumbria, but it deteriorates into this bizarre melodrama, and I think it's meant to be, I don't know. Well, I can see what she was trying to do, but she just failed for me. I could not. It was completely implausible that the characters in the book, that all of them would have ended up going along with what happens. I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. There's a sort of a bad guy father who's set up to be the instigator of this extraordinary plot development, but there's other people there, and they no, the idea that they would have got caught up in that just didn't really make sense to me. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, people who reviewed it, talked about it being heart-stopping and wonderful. So maybe it was just me. I don't think so. No, I know. I've heard a few other people more subsequently on BookTube who had the same reaction. Another book where, again, started really promisingly, and I thought, I'm going to really like this book. This is going to be a great book. I'm going to love this book. It's going to be one of my favourite books, of the year, was The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay. And she's a writer from Bangalore. The book starts in Bangalore. It's got lots of nice writing, vivid detail, family relationships, odd characters, a sort of not entirely likable but believable protagonist. Lots of good stuff going for it. Some dramatic events happen, and she goes off to search for her lost mother and goes to Kashmir. And I won't say any more in terms of the plot because, again, avoiding spoilers. But somewhere around 3/4 of the way through the book, it just started to really go downhill. And what had started out as a really promising, engrossing, satisfying book, and it just sort of deteriorated till by the end it was like, what? No, really? That doesn't make sense. Why would she do that? That's ridiculous. How disappointing it is when that happens. To be fair to that book, it was, to that author rather, it was her first novel, and I could imagine that she could write a better book that doesn't deteriorate like that next time. Whereas, okay, the next one I'm going to choose, which is a book that definitely had an amazing beginning and then really fizzled out, was by a very experienced and highly thought of author, and that's Ian McEwan's Enduring Love. Now, Enduring Love starts with a scene of a hot air balloon crash that is one of the most vivid and successful openings to a book that I can think of. It then goes into a kind of a stalking erotomania story that's okay, and then it just sort of diminishes and drizzles and dissipates into just stupid nothingness as far as I'm concerned. Rarely has the beginning and the ending of a book had more extreme of satisfaction versus dissatisfaction for me. Now, my final choice is this one. Okay, A Visit of the from the Goon Squad. Now then, don't all throw up your arms in horror and shout at me at this point. This is a brilliant book. I genuinely think it is. It's a real must-read book. I would wholeheartedly endorse that view of this book. But this is my example of a book that was like a 5-star, to use that limited way of describing it, 5-star read all the way through, right up to the very, very, very last section of the book when she goes into a sort of a near future story. Um, the structure of this book is brilliant. The different voices, the way it all comes together, the way it works. But the trouble with writing near future in a book that's otherwise been so real and convincing and vivid and just immersive, but in the most intelligent way, to then do a near future story is just a hostage to fortune, isn't it? Because it, if you're reading it now, when was this published? Let me look. So it was published in 2010, and I read it in about 2018 maybe, and already in 7 years her near future is starting to seem wrong and silly and inappropriate. It's just a tactical error, Jennifer Egan. A tactical error in an otherwise totally wonderful book. There we go. That is my my go at the bad endings tag. I'm going to tag a few people relatively no, not randomly, but sort of off the top of my head. So this is my disorganized bad ending to a good tag. And I'm going to tag Alan de Big Hard Books and Classics. I'm going to tag Brian of Bookish, so I expect Shawn already did. I'm going to tag Jyostna of Jyostna's Bookish Escapades, although again Shawn may have already tagged it, I didn't check. I'm going to tag Kristina of Knitting Books, etc. That's it. And I'm going to tag Jim of I always get this the wrong way around, Books, Reading and Stuff. And let's hear about your books with bad endings. Good books with bad endings, remember.